so I can get the millions of views. Alrighty, so the Yuan dynasty in China. Here we have Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's, or excuse me, Chinggis Khan, if you want to go as correct as possible, grandson. Now he had a lot of kids, so being his grandson wasn't particularly unique, but he winds up becoming the next great Khan. And his big achievement is he does what his grandfather could not. He conquers all of China. Genghis Khan was only able to conquer the northern China, ending the Northern Sung Dynasty. And basically, the Chinese government then moves to the south because the Mongols, they just wind up dominating in the north. And the Mongols in the north basically treated the Chinese the same as they treated everyone else. But when Kublai Khan winds up taking over, we get a very interesting situation. Kublai Khan doesn't say, I am great Khan of the Mongols. He says, I am the Emperor of China. So much like when we talked last year about Kush going and when they finally took over Egypt after they'd been dominated by the Egyptians for so long, and Kush said, no, we're Egypt, we're the pharaohs. Kublai comes up with the same kind of thing. He says he is the Emperor of China, and he starts what he calls the Yuan Dynasty, and this will be the Mongols ruling in China. And Kublai, he doesn't dress like a Mongol anymore. He dresses like a Chinese person. He goes and does the unbelievable thing of being like the Chinese and taking baths all the time. Like, seriously, what? Taking baths all the time? Yeah. He started becoming very clean. He goes and starts trying to learn the Chinese language. He has all of his children educated with Chinese education. And it's actually kind of funny because the other Mongol warlords, because he'll still interact with plenty of other Mongols that, from the other Khanates. And they're all going to say, like, Kublai, you're acting so girly and weird. You're taking baths all the time. You're like wearing these nice clothes. Like you've got like fancy like gold jewelry on. You're giving your children an education. What's wrong with you, Kublai? Have you lost your mind? Have you lost your manly Mongolness? He's like, we're very civilized here. So it's pretty cool. But so one of the weird things though is so Kublai really respects the Chinese culture. He's emulating it, meaning he's copying the Chinese and everything. But the Mongols in China wind up being horrible to the Chinese. It's so weird because Kublai clearly respects it, clearly likes it, but the southern Chinese, the Chinese that held out the longest, our Sung Dynasty that ends in 1279 CE, those people in southern China are treated terribly, like dirt. We talked about when the Mongols took over an area, how they would go. Oh, did I skip a slide? Oh, no, I think I might have skipped a slide. We might back up. I'll check it out in a second. Don't worry. Yeah, none of you are actually worried, I can tell. I was like, no, I don't really care. But we should have hopefully talked about on the previous slide on Friday how, when the Mongols took over a place, you had religious freedom, so you could believe whatever you wanted. You paid your taxes to the Mongols. Those taxes were often less than what you paid prior. Your way of life really didn't change. In fact, the Mongols often adopted things that you would do, and yeah, it's wild. But wow, I'm having like crazy deja vu right now. But the Mongols in China were ruthless. There were police and soldiers all over the streets. If you broke a law, severe punishments, like right there. You had very little freedom. Mongols could go wherever they wanted in China. If you were a Chinese person, though, you had to have like a passport, special permission to go from here to there. Mongols could trade without taxes, whereas if you're a Chinese merchant, you have to pay heavy taxes. You can only trade certain things. So we have a complete flipping. And what happens is the wealth of China winds up all going to the Mongols. They steal the wealth of the Chinese. They steal the intellectual property, all the inventions, discoveries, and then they go trade that out. So we're going to see if you were a Chinese and you're in the countryside, you're very poor, whereas the cities were very rich. And the Mongols are going to bring back trade to China. They're going to have tons and tons of trade happening through China. The Sung Dynasty is going to have pulled back a little bit. But so the Mongols will do that. But like I said, the Mongols were pretty fair and good rulers to almost everyone they conquered, with the exception of the Chinese. And it's so weird because clearly Kublai had a lot of respect for the Chinese. Now I'm just going to back this slide up just real fast. Did we do this slide? Okay, yeah, so I totally skipped a slide. I listened to PowerPoint when it said, leave where you start where you just left off. And it lied to Emmy, and then I listened to her because I always do, and that was a mistake. So, rule in the other areas that were not China, which really this should have been first. If you surrendered, it was all cool. If Claire Bear raised her hand in defense, though, annihilation. So basically, it was surrender or die. And the Mongols took that pretty seriously. Now, they wouldn't always exterminate an entire city, but they did exterminate entire cities sometimes. One of the neat things about the Mongols is basically if we had Governor Mide before the Mongols, just as long as Governor Mide didn't tick the Mongols off, Governor Mide might still be in charge because he knew the people, he knew how to run it, and so they would just say, all right, now you pay your taxes to us. One of the things that we talked a lot about is that the Mongols are going to give complete religious freedom. The Mongols did not care about what religion folks believed in. Like I said, the Mongols typically adopted whatever religion of the region. So some Khanates are going to be majority Muslim, some Khanates are going to be majority Buddhist, some Khanates are going to be majority Christian. It's just the Mongols adopted to whatever their local culture. And one of the things that's really interesting is we find that typically the Mongols had a lot less corruption than other governments. Government corruption is something that happens in many, many countries when politicians, the leaders, they do things that are bad and they get away with it. And, people make lots of money and people do terrible things. But we don't see that happening with the Mongol governments typically. And probably because the Mongol consequences were so severe. If it turns out Sahil was embezzling, meaning stealing money through things, Sahil's punishment would be execution. Like, there probably wouldn't be much of a trial. Like, a Mongolian would just come and, remove his noggin. So Sahil likes to keep his noggin, so he doesn't go and be corrupt. All right, so I apologize for the out of order with that. Very sorry about that. So let's see. We said slides 13. Where is that? Yeah, 13 through 15. So we're going to do one more slide because we're going to talk about the Mongols and Japan next. The Mongols and Japan, which I always love this one. All right, so once again, I apologize for being out of order, out of sequence. Ugh, hate things like that. So we already talked about all that. So, Mongols, unstoppable force. No one can defeat them. The Manlocks managed to beat them in battle and kick them out of going and conquering Egypt. However, they turned back because there's another Coral Tide because a great Khan died. So it's not even a full, they beat them and they definitely beat them. It was the Mongols lost a small battle and then wound up leaving. So how does Japan not follow the Mongols? And it's a lot of luck. So the Mongols rule China. They go south and capture Korea, which in their opinion was basically part of China, which we know that the Koreans have a very different culture. It's very unique. I love that we get to talk about Korea a little bit later on in the year. But the Mongols, much like to the southern Chinese, were very cruel and horrible to the Koreans. And essentially, they forced the Koreans to make a humongous navy and then man the ships. And they create this humongous fleet, one of the largest fleets of the time period. and they sail them to Japan. But before they get there to Japan, the kamikaze comes. Now, kamikaze is called is Japanese for the divine wind. When we study Japan later on this year, we're going to talk about Shintoism, the indigenous religion of Japan, and how Shintoism has a belief of spirits called the kami, and that nature has kami. People that are important, like the emperor, have a kami. Trees have a kami. The streams, nice rocks in the river have a kami. But a big typhoon comes. A typhoon is what we would call a hurricane. It's very interesting how in the Western Hemisphere, it's a hurricane. In the Eastern Hemisphere, or excuse me, in the Atlantic Ocean, it's a hurricane. In the Pacific Ocean, it is a typhoon. And in the Indian Ocean, it's a cyclone. Why each of them have a different name, I have no idea. But it's a giant tropical storm. And the storm goes and destroys the Mongol fleet. Destroys it. So Kublai Khan is rather ticked off at this, but because he's treating the Koreans essentially as slave labor, he makes the Koreans build another navy. Another navy. And this time, this navy does land some of the soldiers in Japan, where the Japanese and the Mongols, they battle. And we have the Japanese samurai versus the Mongolian warrior. And it's not going well for Japan. The Mongolian fleet decides to move its soldiers around to try to do some, fancy schmancy, get them all surrounded and do this. Mongolian fleet once again hit by the kamikaze, the divine wind, and it destroys the Mongolian fleet. And then the Japanese are able to repel the small amount of Mongols that are left. So twice we have Mother Nature saving the Japanese. And it's actually really, really interesting because we have these instances of typhoons destroying the Mongolian fleets, and it gives the Japanese this idea that they're invincible, that no one can ever conquer them because the kamikaze will save them. And what's crazy is this is going to help change the Japanese mind. We're going to see how different Japan is going to be when we start studying them, how we have this focus on personal honor with the Bushido code, and how we have Japan creating this warrior society. And then how they're going to see that, well, this warrior society, it's invincible. And that's going to lead even into modern times, because this idea is going to last up to World War II. So until 1945, the Japanese had this idea that they were invincible, that the kamikaze would save them. Some of you might be familiar with that term kamikaze because that's what the suicide pilots of the Japanese Air Force were called, kamikaze. And the idea was that they would fly their plane into the United States battleships to go try to sink the battleships. Unfortunately, it would kill themselves in the process. So we have that word, we've seen it again, but literally when the US was gearing up to possibly invade Japan, which did not happen because the atomic bomb was used, there was this thought that Japan will be safe no matter what. So it's kind of crazy how something that happens in the 1200s, we're going to see even affecting Japan over 600 years later. Anyways, that's our notes for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, I apologize for my error. I am stopping the recording now.